Today I want to share about how I think the Protestant Reformation led to Jehovah's Witness theology. I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and I know that Protestants would want to distance themselves from Jehovah's Witnesses, especially since Jehovah's Witnesses deny basic Christian doctrines like the Trinity. And I think it would be fair to say that there's a wide chasm between Protestants and Jehovah's Witnesses. But just how deep or wide is that split? Is the jump really that far? My position is that in some cases, the Jehovah's Witnesses simply took Protestant Reformation theology to their logical conclusions. And I would like to prove that using two main examples. The first example of that is of iconoclasm. The Protestant Reformation was full of strife over the use of images, icons, and statues. It should be said that Martin Luther generally saw it as a good thing and helpful thing to use images, but others didn't agree. Calvin basically argued that all images should be removed from churches. He wrote in the Institutes of the Christian Religion, "Let us here consider whether it is expedient that churches should contain representations of any kind, whether of events or human forms. First, then, if we attach any weight to the authority of the ancient church, let us remember that for 500 years, during which religion was in a more prosperous condition and a purer doctrine flourished, Christian churches were completely free from visible representations. Basically, churches would be better off with no images, no statues, no icons, nothing." Thomas Cranmer, a theologian of the English Reformation and the Archbishop of Canterbury, said that there could be some good in looking at images. He wrote that he would not utterly deny that some good could come from images. However, he said, "I think it more convenient for the Christian religion that they should be taken out of Christian men's churches than they should be placed in the temple of God. And this is my opinion. I will show you on certain grounds to think that when you be demanded why we Englishmen have no images in our churches, you may be able to make a reasonable answer, and that also in time you may declare to your children what abuses have crept into the church by the occasion of images." He said it is better to avoid the peril. Excuse my botched reading there, but that was all in Old English, so I was trying to read it in regular English. A Dr. Nicholas Ridley, who was an English bishop, wrote a treatise to King Edward VI, pleading with him to remove images from churches. He wrote, "Images in the church either serve to edify or to destroy. If they edify, then there is a kind of edification which the scriptures neither teach nor command, but always disallow. If they destroy, they are not to be used, for in the church of God all things ought to be done to edify." He said, "God's scripture in no place commands the use of images, but in a great number of places doth disallow and condemn them." He said, "It is the invention of them was the beginning of spiritual fornication, and that they were not from the beginning, neither shall they continue to the end." Ironically, he also says that they are, referring to images, called in the Book of Wisdom the trap and snare of the feet of the ignorant. Yeah, he's using wisdom, but that's a digression. He wouldn't be able to use that argument now, I guess, because he wouldn't have that book anymore. Anyways, under King Edward VI, iconoclasm grew. Many images, statues, and paintings were destroyed during this time. What's interesting to me is that while many reformers poo-pooed imagery in churches, they were positive about imagery being used in secular institutions and in private ways. Today, many so-called high Protestant churches may contain some historical images, maybe stained glass windows, art, etc. But in most average lower churches of Protestantism, you won't find that kind of thing. At most, you will find a prominent but plain cross. Now, I think the Jehovah's Witnesses took this theological reasoning to its logical conclusion. They removed the plain cross. And it makes sense, because if all images are bad, why should the cross remain? The Jehovah's Witnesses had the logical conclusion. The cross is also bad. This is why the Jehovah's Witnesses have buildings that look more like a business than anything a person may dream up if they think of Christianity and a church. There are no pictures except maybe a picture of a flower or some inanimate object that has nothing to do with God. A side note here that doesn't make sense is that even though they won't have art in their buildings, they will have beautiful, attractive imagery in their literature and in their videos. So you can see the confusion here. I think that both Reformers, Protestants, and Jehovah's Witnesses know the value of attractive images, color, shapes, form. Jehovah's Witnesses use that knowledge that's obvious to pretty much everyone to their advantage to invite you to their kingdom halls, into their buildings, devoid of anything like that. But in any case, the Jehovah's Witnesses' argument and conclusion was made possible by the Protestant claim that having statues and images leads to idolatry. Example number 2 is that the Protestant rejection of Jesus really meaning this is my body and this is my blood led to the Jehovah's Witnesses actually changing the words in their Bible. You see, Jehovah's Witnesses actually changed the words of Matthew 26 verse 26, where Jesus says this is my body to this means my body. Now, I know there's variations in Protestantism about what they believe about the Eucharist, but I'm going to focus on ones that take a primarily memorialistic view. Denominations that followed after Zwingli's primarily held belief that the meaning of the Eucharist was purely symbolic. That's what I'm talking about. Many Protestants would say that communion is a representation of what Jesus was saying there. It's symbolic. It is pointing us to Christ, but it is not Christ. They might say it is very sacred and meaningful, but it's because of what it represents. It's not that the bread or the wine or juice is in itself necessarily sacred in any way. Therefore, when these kinds of Protestants talk about the Eucharist, they actually change what Jesus says. When he says, this is my body or this is my blood, they are saying, well, he means that it represents his body or it represents his blood. The witnesses simply took this to a next step, a logical next step. Instead of simply explaining that verse to mean that, they changed the actual word in their Bible. They did in their translation of the Bible what Protestants only do in their speech. We can see a similar example of this when you think of the debate that just happened between Joe and Ryan on baptism. Don't know if you've watched that, but in that debate, Ryan seemed to argue that the ending of Mark 16 didn't actually belong in the Bible. Why? Well, because he has a symbolic view of baptism and because the ending of Mark 16 is hard to square with his beliefs. Well, again, Jehovah's Witnesses did actually just take that to the logical conclusion. That part of the Bible is not in their Bibles. So, Ryan, the Jehovah's Witnesses are one step ahead of you. In any case, that's all I've got for you guys tonight. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe. I really do want to make more videos like this. I really love talking about theology. And yeah, I hope you will stick along for the ride. Bye.